All right, another episode of the Square and Compass podcast, back doing once again a long form podcast episode. My focus really has been much more on live streams, which I love doing. However, it meant I've had less of these pre-recorded or recorded interviews. So it is my pleasure to welcome Worshipful Brother Ronald Andrew Albright, otherwise known as Andy Albright. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thank you, Cameron. It's a pleasure to be here today.
I mean, I'm just going to go through your biography quickly, although feel free to add anything in that may have been missed. If I do miss something, it's not my fault. You can blame Arcana Veritas, because that is where I got the biography from. Your Worshipful Brother Andy Albright, which is what I'm
Yep.
going to stick to calling you Andy, because that
Yes.
seems to be by what you go by. Raised as a Master Mason in 2012, Carolina Lodge number 375, South Carolina. Served as Master of the Lodge in 2017, while also serving as President of the Lowcountry Masters and Wardens Club. Served as the Grand Pursuivant of the Grand Lodge of South Carolina from April 2018 to April 2019. Charter member of Fiat Lux Lodge 432, Master of that one in 2021. As member of the Charleston Valley of Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite, Southern Masonic Jurisdiction, invested with the rank of Knight Commander of the Court of Honor in 2019. In 2021, you became the Adept of Guthrie College of the Consistory by composing college-level essays on all 29 degrees. So good for you, because I could not compose a college-level essay on one of the degrees, let alone all 29 of them. 2022, invested with the Active Legion of Honor by the International Supreme Council of D. Molay, published 4 works, Are You Hiram, Striking the Stone, The Spiritual Path of Freemasonry, Masonic Commedia, which we're talking about today, Freemasonry and the Divine Comedy, and Understanding Kabbalah, A Story of the Sephiroths. Did I miss anything?
I don't know if it's type story, but it should be study of the Sephiroths.
Oh, you're right. Study. If I said story, forgive me. I almost got it done there. I almost got it through. Understanding Kabbalah, a study of the
Yeah.
Sephiroths, not story.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about Commedia in particular, but
Mhm.
all of those books, all 4 of them, are they all available on Amazon or for order?
Yes, all 4 of them are there. Um, I published myself, Are You Hiram, Striking the Stone, and Understanding Kabbalah. Perfect Ashler Publishing took care of Masonic Commedia for me.
Okay, but they're all available on Amazon to order.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would recommend to anybody who I mean, you don't even have to be a Mason to find it of interest, but certainly if you are a Mason, maybe order a couple books, one for yourself personally, but also one to leave in a bookshelf at your Masonic building. Give a chance for some other brethren to check it out. But yeah, welcome again. Thank you so much for being here. How are things going in South Carolina?
Oh, going fantastic. We're in our usual fall to winter where turn the heat on at night and air conditioning on in the afternoon. Uh, it's almost 80 degrees right now, but it's going down to 40 tonight. So,
I mean, I've never had the pleasure of visiting South Carolina. I'd love to. Fingers crossed, one day I will be able to. But one place I will be visiting, along with yourself, and
mhm.
hence kind of this podcast, is the Old Country, United Kingdom, specifically Edinburgh, the Grand Lodge of Scotland. We'll be attending the Arcana Veritas Distinction Awards ceremony on November 26th. The reason being, both of us were selected as finalists in different categories um, for the Arcana Veritas Distinction Awards. Uh, in your case, I've talked plenty on stream about the category for which I was nominated as a finalist.
Mhm.
I've talked about what the Arcana Veritas Awards are. I'll leave links to those episodes and videos up in the corner. I want to focus specifically on yourself and your work. It was selected as a finalist under the Masonic Philosophy and Symbolism book. Um, you know, I can kind of read through the explanation of the work from Arcana Veritas,
Mhm.
but I think maybe it makes more sense for it to come from you directly, right? So why don't you let us know, from Worshipful Brother Andy Albright, what is what is Masonic Commedia, Freemasonry and the Divine Comedy? What is it about? And yeah, what topic does it explore when it comes to Masonic philosophy?
It covers a whole wide range of different topics and philosophies. Um, as the title suggests, it's all extracted from Dante's work, The Divine Comedy, which a little bit of trivia here, the word divine in that title wasn't added until 500 years after his death. The original poem was just called comedy. Comedy in this sense, in the classical literature sense, doesn't mean something that we have today. Doesn't match up. Comedy today would be more of a drama, something that starts off with a person in a kind of a bad way or a rough spot, and he works through it, and then there's a happy, joyful ending. Hence the two theater masks that are on the book cover. The story of going from darkness of trouble, exile, um, to a time of happiness and a restoration of faith and joy. Masonic Commedia takes you on this journey with Dante, but using a lot of the philosophies that we have in Freemasonry. The book is in three parts. Part one, A Walk Through Hell. This looks at the seven liberal arts and sciences and their moral properties. From
You know,
another book.
Sorry, before we get into the more specifics of kind of the structure of the book and the topics, more in general, what what is it about the Divine Comedy, and the Divine Comedy specifically, and maybe even Dante more generally? What was it about that work that you found compelling enough to link it to Freemasonry, or to write about it, right? Did your interest in Dante predate your involvement in Freemasonry?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so when you first joined, right, it was in, if I recall correctly, Master Mason in 2012, if I recall correctly. Yes, Master Mason, October 30, 2012. So as you were going through your degrees, you already had an awareness, and a knowledge of the Divine Comedy and of the Inferno. As you were going through the degrees, did the parallels between Freemasonry and Dante, did they appear to you immediately as you were looking back? Did you start to see those connections? What was it about maybe your Masonic journey that led you to perhaps re-examine Dante from a Masonic perspective?
Oh, as I was going through the College of the Consistory, I began to learn how to put pieces together, just different associations between literature and Masonic teaching. Um, I was familiar with Dante. I was an English major at a little community college in Georgia, where I was just basically earning promotion points while I was on active duty in the Army. Um, and I fell in love with his work. Inferno is the only story that has actually incited fear in me for the graphic details he wrote as he's going through the different levels of hell. And just one day, I'm doing this comparative study between Robert Frost poetry and looking at some Masonic symbolism in there, and it just dawned on me. Dante had to go through hell, and it describes all these different punishments for these different souls that are in there and the different sins. And then I remembered geometry. And one of the things in geometry is inverse properties, um, sine and cosine specifically. And I thought, well, we have these several liberal arts and sciences, and they teach us these moral lessons. What's their inverse property? And that's where it clicked. It just kind of this my mind wandering off in all these different areas of exploration and um, just kind of free thinking ideas and going way outside the traditional box, if you will. And that's where I found it. Well, this is curious. Let me start looking on this a little more. And the more I started diving into it, the more I started finding these similarities or these references that could work in understanding Freemasonry in this great epic poem of Dante. And the more I got into it, the book idea came to my mind, and I started scribbling notes. And a year and a half later, here it is, Masonic Commedia.
And the as you were, and I mean, I saw I reviewed some of the book. I saw at the start of it, you dedicate or you acknowledge in the book some of the brethren and one worshipmaster in particular who helped you with the editing
Mm-hmm.
process. As
Mm-hmm.
you were working on this, even when the idea first came, you said it was about a year and a half from the initial idea to write the book to completion. Were you talking to your Masonic brethren about um, the parallels you were seeing and about this idea? And what was the response like from the Masonic brethren? Or did you focus it more on your own personal experiences and kind of wait until the book was completed to start talking with the brethren about the parallels you were seeing?
No, I was definitely talking to the brethren about it and sharing with them what I was coming up with. Um, I actually wrote up a education to present that talks about the seven liberal arts and sciences and um, the moral applications Dante gives to them in a book called Convivio, which was a unfinished work of his in the late 13th century, early 14th century. And as I began to kind of look into that aspect, and I started talking to the craft about it, and said, "Hey, Kim, you ever thought about this? You know, we get these liberal arts and sciences, but no one ever has really explained what the moral property is. Why are we given these? What am I supposed to get from this?" And as I talk to the brothers and I present these educations, they're all going, "I never thought of it that way." So I got a lot of positive feedback from them, and how they appreciate the way things were kind of matched up and lining up.
So you're talking earlier, right? The Divine Comedy, as you noted, it's divided into three parts, right? The descent, I guess, into or through might be the better verb. Or what would through be in that case? The descent through, the better. Can't think of the word it would be. Not verb, not noun. The better, whatever, but the better
Yeah.
word instead of descent into hell, it's descent through hell, right?
Yeah.
Because he does come out the other side. And then purgatory, and then the ascent to heaven,
Mhm.
which Virgil sadly doesn't get to join him on, which I always thought was unfair to poor Virgil.
Yeah.
Um, he gets to all the hard parts, right? You know, which does line up quite nicely with at least Craft or Blue Lodge, the first 3 degrees. You have 3 degrees, you have the three
Mhm.
parts. Um, and you started talking about the parallels you saw in each of these parts, specifically the initial descent. So, what kind of, I think the best way to do it is to divide it up into those three parts. So, when it comes to the descent through hell,
Mhm.
what what are some of the parallels you saw in that first book with Freemasonry? You mentioned specifically the seven liberal arts and sciences. So, what were the connections therein?
Well, it, it took some time to kind of figure out which of the liberal arts and sciences I wanted to marry up with which level of hell. Now, clearly, there are seven liberal arts, but there were some say nine. I say there are 10 levels of hell. I don't think a lot of people count limbo as being one of them, but I kind of did. But anyway, it was looking at the properties that Dante gives them in Convivio as a moral application, and then looking at the inverse property uh, in Inferno. Um, for example, if I remember correctly, I took take like grammar, or no, I'm sorry, not grammar, rhetoric. All right, in Convivio, Dante makes it clear that there are rules about rhetoric that have to be followed for rhetoric to be effective, such as not talking down about yourself or talking down about your debate partner, um, things of this nature, and in and being very judicious in your words and restricting them and just not letting anything out that your heart so desires. And I thought, well, that kind of sounds like the opposite of greed. So then I look at Dante's Ring of Hell covering greed. And that's where you get into things like avarice, fragility, which those two are essentially um, uh, over uh, the hoarding of wealth. And then one is the extravagant spending of wealth. And in Dante's version of hell, these two sins, people of this sin, they're walking in this half circle. And when they bump into one another, they yell, "Why do you spend so much?" And the other one says, "Why do you hoard?" And then they walk back around again. And that's what they do for all eternity. So that's the way I developed the parallels. And it took some time to do that. Uh, but the just the graphic nature of what was in Inferno made it a kind of a good challenge to link them with the different liberal arts and sciences. But in the end, it wound up making a very good study. And not only that, but also brought in the seven ancient planets into the mix. So you get a lot of different things mixed in there.
What would you say are some of the key lessons that, and again, we'll stick with the first of the three, right? What are some of the key lessons that you would suggest or you think are important for a Freemason to take with them from the Divine Comedy throughout their Masonic journey, or I suppose even throughout life, but specifically in this case, throughout their Masonic journey?
Well, Albert Pike wrote in a book called Esoterica that Blue Lodge teaching was woefully insufficient in explaining to candidates for each of the degrees what they need to learn. And to a point, I can see that, because as I mentioned, we get these seven liberal arts and sciences. We know what they are. We know what grammar is, and rhetoric, and logic, and so forth. But what am I supposed to get from that? What lessons am I supposed to extract? So what Masonic Commedia does in that first part is give us anyone studying Masonry and looking for more of an explanation. They're able to take away from it that kind of aha, now I get it moment of, I was given this information in the arts and sciences. Now I understand how I can use it and apply it to my life. It that first part pretty much helps explain the sort of dual nature of man, the spiritual versus the animal side. We desire to be the spiritual side, but we also have this animal side that stand in contrast. So by understanding the significance of the moral properties of the liberal arts and sciences, we keep that animal side under control. So that's kind of the direction I was pointing it in.
And I think obviously from there we have the second part. I feel like usually that's the part of the Divine Comedy that gets the most overlooked. Middle child syndrome, similar to the fellowcraft degree, I feel like, perpetual middle child. When it came to, and even I have to admit, right, I'm very not. I lack a lot of familiarity with. I know Dante's Inferno pretty well. I feel like it's been a while since I've read it. Purgatory, I know. I've never read it. It's one of those ones where I know very little about it. When you started looking at purgatory and again applying it to Freemasonry or thinking about it in Masonic terms, what are some things about purgatory that stuck out to you? And again, from a Masonic perspective, what are some of the lessons and ideas that you think Freemasons can take from that second book?
Purgatory was a work I was kind of familiar with it. Everybody focuses on the mountain and the seven tiers of the mountain, but what's in purgatory that a lot of people miss is called the anti-purgatory, spelled ANTE. In other words, before purgatory. And when you read it, there is this plane, if you will, where the souls go to, and they're not admitted through the doorway leading to the mountain of purgatory until they are able to demonstrate a genuine remorse for their sin. There's one part in there where these souls are singing, they're jubilant, and this angel comes down and says, in more modern terms, it says, "Have you lost your minds? Do you not understand where you're at and why you're here? You have to work to prove yourselves worthy to gain entrance into heaven." And he kind of quiets them down and makes them realize, yeah, we've got some things to work out in our own hearts. So, and I think that is an important lesson for all Masons, for people who seek and desire admission into our craft, is to take that time of self-examination. Find out, what is your purpose? What is your real reason for wanting to petition to receive the degrees of Freemasonry? Is it for some personal gain, or you have a genuine interest in fraternal bonds of friendship and brotherhood? Masonry, I think, appeals a lot to a lot of veterans because in here they find that same kind of camaraderie and unity among craft that they had in the armed service days. So,
Do you find that to be the case in 2025? The veterans kind of being interested in Freemasonry or just being interested in Freemasonry in general, because that's a fascinating. I mean, I want to write a paper on this. I'm just not sure where to start. But there's a fascinating kind of history of Freemasonry as it relates to service members joining, right? I speak for the Canadian perspective, right? But I believe this is true for much of North America and the United Kingdom. The two great boom periods within Freemasonry were the 1920s and the 1950s. And membership in both of those boom periods was fueled primarily, I forget that, I think I heard 75%, 80% at one point, by returning veterans from World War I and World War II joining, likely for the reasons you expressed. It's interesting, I always point out that the reason I'm able to be a Freemason is because of those returning veterans. Because in Ontario, as was the case in every jurisdiction I know of, until I think the 30s or 40s, before then, to join Freemasonry, you needed to be a quote unquote whole person, which meant you couldn't be missing your limbs. And I'm missing both of my legs. And in Ontario, anyways, the reason that rule was changed was actually because veterans were returning from World War I, missing limbs from battle, requesting to join lodges, and were being denied because they were missing limbs. And obviously, Grand Lodge, to its credit, realized there was something pretty perverse about that, about denying admittance to a veteran because they lost their limbs in service of the country. And I believe it was 22 or 21, I forget which year. Basically, they changed the rule and allowed men to join who were missing limbs. And I'm sure that many Masons wish they never changed that, because that meant I could get in, and most Masons wouldn't, I'm sure, like to see me kicked out. However, or at least stop talking so much. However, but going back to this idea of through time, right? What at least I noticed is you did not see veterans expressing a particular interest in joining Freemasonry after the Vietnam War. You did not really, at least to my knowledge, you certainly didn't see numbers growing in that time. You did not really see them interested in joining after the Korean War. However, that could be because, to my knowledge, a lot of veterans in the Korean War were also in World War II. And so they may have already joined, right? You know, and I've known veterans who are Freemasons, but it doesn't seem like there's as much interest in the veteran community, you know, in later years as there was after World War I and World War II. But I'm curious if you've been seeing maybe in South Carolina or just in your experiences, you know, a greater number of veterans interested in joining Freemasonry once again.
Yeah, we have here in Charleston, we're home with the Navy's Nuclear Power Training Center for submariners. So we've gotten candidates for the degrees who were still in school here. We've got people who were instructors out here. We have a former commanding officer, a captain in the Navy, who was a part of a lodge with me at Carolina Lodge, and then followed me over to Fiat Lux. So yeah, I still see a good number of veterans. The Lowcountry here is a military town. We had Navy Yard here up through the 1980s. We still have Charleston Air Force Base here. That's active. So a lot of veterans in this area, and a lot of veterans scattered out through all the Masonic lodges here.
I mean, and you could argue, right, that Freemasonry is, you know, Freemasonry and the military kind of go hand in glove, historically, if nothing else, right? I mean, you know, I've said before, Freemasonry is kind of the story of stone and water. The stone is obvious, but the water, I mean, Freemasonry originating in, well, I mean, it depends how you want to define originating, but I tend to take the most literal interpretation. Freemasonry originating in England, right? It really traveled outside of England thanks to the Navy primarily, and then the military afterwards. Most of Freemasonry in Europe, including Eastern Europe through to Asia, you know, followed either behind or followed with military garrisons that had Masonic lodges set up in them, right? And so there's and then obviously the 20s and the 50s and the boom period fueled by veterans. I mean, there's just a fascinating link between Freemasonry and the military. And I mean, even in 2025, you still have a lot of echoes of that in the Middle East, right? To my knowledge, in a couple Middle Eastern countries, Qatar being one of them, there's one Masonic lodge and it's located on a military base, American military base, which is no different than, again, the 17, whatever it was, 17 something or rather, the exclusive Masonic lodge in Russia being located in a British camp, or India for that matter, right? So it's just a fascinating, I think there's a real, I think there's a real paper in there, but also what is it about later generations of veterans that, at least from a numbers perspective, didn't seem that interested in joining Freemasonry as compared to World War I and World War II, especially upon return, right? Like, even what you said is fascinating, because it's one thing to join Freemasonry or desire to join Freemasonry while you're still in your training or in your schooling for the military. It's another thing to be interested in joining upon return.
Yeah,
I just think it's very interesting thing. I just don't quite know how to go about researching it more in depth. If everybody has any ideas, put it in the comments. Having said that, I'm glad that, you know, there's still a large veteran contingent in your community, for example, joining lodges, right? I do think there is a definite military, again, military and Freemasonry, especially Freemasonry and the Navy in particular, I think really do go hand in hand throughout history. If it wasn't for those naval ships transporting Freemasons outside of England, you know, Freemasonry might never have made it outside of England.
Oh yeah, and there's a tradition in Masonic lodges that actually as far as I can tell, it originates from the British Army, and that's only one person wearing a hat. Now, from a romantic perspective, we say, well, there's only one king of Israel. That was Solomon, so there's only one crown. In the 16th, 17th, 18th century British Army, in a room, only the senior officer present wore his hat. All of the others had to remove their hats. If a more senior officer came into the room, the now junior officer had to remove his hat. So that way, there's only senior officer present wore his. And Masonic lodges are kind of that same way.
To all the Canadian Masons who've never traveled and are very confused at the moment, they wear hats in the States. The Worshipful Master, I should say, wears a hat. Preston Webb ritual. Yeah, I did not know. I mean, I knew obviously the Worship Master was a hat. I had no idea. I mean, I didn't even know about the Solomon connection, let alone I never had asked why it is that the Worship Master wears the hat. I was just like, oh, that's how they do it. They're a little bit funny in the States compared to us here in Canada, an emulation ritual. But that's very cool. And that does make sense to me. Honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if the tradition actually derived from, literally derived from military protocol. It could have metaphorically, when they're developing it, found the metaphorical reason with King Solomon. But there's a lot of that, you see. I mean, the military throughout the years has left its stamp on Freemasonry, and which is a good thing. Again, we kind of owe it to them because obviously our first allegiance or first show of respect should always be to the stonemason guilds that allowed us to form from them. But I think a very close second, again, is the military that allowed Freemasonry to travel. And you could metaphorically, you could view the military as the bloodstream through which Freemasonry was allowed to travel throughout the world. So going back to Commedia though, and the idea of purgatory and what you got from purgatory, it seems like the major lesson perhaps within that second book is the idea of contemplation and contemplating what it is and your reason for being a Freemason and what it is you hope to derive. Would that be accurate to say?
Oh, absolutely accurate. Purgatory is all about self-examination. From the time you enter the plane on anti-purgatory, to the time you get this, you have to walk up 3 steps to get to the entrance to purgatory. That ought to sound familiar. And each of those steps has a different color. And there's an interpretation that I offered for that in the book. And it takes a gold and a silver key by this angel robed in brown for him to unlock the door. And only the truly repentant are allowed to pass beyond that door and enter into the labor required to ascend purgatory. So everything about it starts with self-awareness, awareness of some manner of bias or prejudice or something of that nature. If you still have it, the angel keeps the door locked and like, sorry, back to the field you go. And so purgatory, like Masonry, forces the individual to look at their heart. What's the attitude of their heart? What's guiding and directing them? And then as you go through each of the levels, that's where I took the 3 great duties of brotherly love, relief, and truth, and the 4 cardinal virtues, and ascribed them to each of the 7 levels of purgatory. Because when you think about it, those 3 duties and cardinal virtues, they're not nouns, they're verbs. They're things you should be actively doing.
When you think about, I mean, this is something I think we in Freemasonry have been struggling with a little bit. I've said before, and to some extent, to be honest, the conversation has started to bore me a little bit just because of how often it's brought up. This idea of guarding the West Gate
Mhm.
Yeah, I feel like if in the last 10, 20 years, I think probably more ink has been spilt and more minutes used in a lodge meeting to discuss guarding the West Gate than almost any other topic.
Yeah.
And I do wonder, there's obviously there's obviously a bad reason to join Freemasonry if you're joining for because of false information. So if you believe, for example, that uh, Freemasons are hiding a spaceship in the Vatican, or you read too much Dan Brown, or something of that, where you're just factually
Yeah.
incorrect, right?
Yeah.
But beyond factual incorrect, do you think that there are good and bad reasons to join Freemasonry? Um, or do you think even if somebody's joining for quote unquote a bad reason, and again, obviously assuming of their own free will and accord, so another bad reason that's obvious would be they're being forced to by whomever it is, a
Right.
father-in-law says like you can't marry my daughter unless you're a Freemason, or I don't know, something weird like that. I mean, I do feel like we've become a little bit within Freemasonry, um, a little bit maybe overcorrecting in the idea of guarding the West Gate, where it went from almost anybody can come through as soon as they knock on the door, they're given an application,
Yeah.
to kind of drilling down on, oh, you want to network for your business? Well, is that a really good reason? Is your heart into it? It's, you know, to me
Yeah.
personally, if somebody wants to join for that reason, so long as they're going to maintain the secret, so long as they're going to not cause trouble in lodge, who's to say that they can't join for that purpose? I don't know. To me, I feel like there's been a bit of an overcorrection within the idea of what constitutes a reason for joining. But what are your thoughts about this idea of assigning assigning judgments to the motivations for people to join Freemasonry?
Oh, I think to a point it has its place. Um, but I also think there are people who take it too far to an extreme. Um, I'm aware of a circumstance where an individual tried to join a lodge, and a background investigation revealed that this guy um, was running afoul of the law frequently. And he was under the impression that if he joined the Masonic Lodge, we were going to protect him from any kind of legal prosecution. No, that's not what we're here for. That
As it should be, right? I think everybody needs to understand that's not, if you are a Mason and you're committing crimes, then your brethren should be advising the authorities, and they're instructed to.
Yeah, and I think that goes to one of the uh, you know uh, one of the things we have to look at as far as who comes through that west gate. Now, does a guy say, "Hey, I want to become a Mason because I'm interested in doing things for brothers and networking and helping them out"? I think that's a good motive. Because they're not necessarily coming there for their own selfish reasons. They're going to say, "Hey, I got a plan to do something to help y'all out. Good deal. Let's do it. Let's rock and roll with it." Um, I think where a lot of Masons get confused is, you know, in South Carolina, in our code and constitution, you have what's called Article 249. 249 says that if a Mason of any degree gets convicted of a felony, automatic expulsion. No trial, no nothing. Unless the Grand Master has a confirmation of the sentencing for a felony, you're done. You're out. But that doesn't mean if a man has committed a felony prior to petitioning a lodge, he should be automatically excluded. Because I'm aware of a circumstance where an individual got convicted for domestic violence. He went to a drug house and attempted to get his wife out. And some people had a problem with that because it was still a felony conviction. But for 20 years since then, this guy had nothing. So yeah, unfortunately, I think people take it a little too far sometimes.
Yeah, no, and I've given my own opinions on the idea of a criminal record or the idea of an applicant with some type of criminal record on my streams, right? My position has always been, I think a criminal record check should be a part of the application process. Not every jurisdiction has that. However, I don't believe that I don't believe anything should automatically be exclusionary on the record. Rather, I think what you find, it's up to the sponsors as well as the committee to talk to him, to have him explain what happened, how he's potentially either has or hasn't tried to change his life and turn his life around. Was he punished? Whatever it is, and then you provide the information to the lodge to make the vote, based on their own conscience. But even the idea though of this idea of like mercenary means being odd. Like again, if you own you're a real estate agent and you think joining a Masonic lodge you'll get more, you'll increase your network and therefore get more leads. I mean, that was, in the 1920s, again, during that boom period and the 30s, there was the famous stereotype of somebody who was called Barry the Joiner. And he was the person he was an elk, a moose, a mason, a Shriner, which is a type, obviously part of Freemasonry. He was part of the Rotary, right? And it was this kind of the stereotype of the guy in the small town who joins every body and organization he can be a part of, either because he wants to be the mayor or wants to grow his business or whatever it might be. And there was definitely a level of eye rolling to that stereotype about that type of person, but it didn't automatically exclude him from being a member. The theory being, right, so long as you're so long as you can join, be in the meeting, not be disruptive, not, break up the disharmony of the lodge and maintain all the rules and regulations around secrecy, whatever, and those things. There's no reason that somebody who joins, let's say, because they plan to run for mayor one day and want to be part of as many different groups as they can, to me, there's no reason why that person could not necessarily also be a good Mason. I think it seems sometimes this over-examination of motivations. It's somebody on my live stream. It's a bit of a coarse example, but we were talking about this on a live stream, and he said sometimes Masons remind me of the guy who, can't get a girlfriend, but always turn away every girl that approaches them. Within Freemasonry, we're always talking about our numbers dropping, and yet we seem to be increasing the number of kind of, not restrictions per se, but the amount of questioning we're doing of people's motivations. He's like, do you want your numbers to go up or not? It's kind of like the guy who, again, can't get any girls to fuck him, but always runs the way you come to approach him. So I don't know. I think it's one of those questions where it's a fascinating discussion. And I think, to go back to purgatory, it's this idea of how much of whose responsibility is it ultimately to examine the motivations of someone joining once you move past the obviously bad ones, right? Of I'm trying to hide from the law. Is it up to the lodge and the sponsors to question the motivations, or is it up to the individual who's applying to look in his own heart and question his motivations? Like who's that responsibility on at the end of it? I think is an interesting question.
I think at the end of it, it's the individual themselves petitioning the degrees. Only they know their real motives and intentions, and they can say anything. From my perspective, I sometimes I tend to look at it as more, you can tell me what you want, but I won't believe what you do. So you see somebody come into a Masonic lodge and they give you, they can give you great reasons and everything else. But eventually it's going to be, how did they perform in the lodge? How are they becoming a part of it? How are they willing to engage with us in the community? That's where you're going to know what their real motive was. If there were less than virtuous ideas, I think eventually they're going to wash themselves out.
And reasons change too, right? I mean, this is what I talked about within my paper that was nominated for the Arcana Veritas Award, right? The motivation that someone has to join, and the motivation that someone has to remain are very different things, especially when you're in the 10th, 15th, 20th year of your service. Usually, you often see motivations can start to change pretty significantly after someone's been in the East at least once, right? Because it's, you start to see, for one thing, there can be this feeling of, well, I've done like all I can do. I've reached the highest rank or whatever, which is not really a good way to look at it, but I've reached the rank of worshipful master. Getting those past masters to stick around and motivate them is usually a very different challenge than what motivates an entered apprentice to keep coming out. So motivations do change. And that is also something to keep in mind, right? The motivation that somebody has to join is not going to be the same thing that motivates them to keep showing up. It might lose its motivating factor, 10 years down the road. I'm sure you've seen it plenty of times within your career, as well as we all have, right? The missing past master.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The big question I think Masonry struggles to answer is simply two letters, two words. What next? You get to a point, you've got the Master Mason degree. What next? What happens next? And I think that's where you either capture or you lose somebody is in that moment. You say, well, you get them involved in the work of the lodge. Well, yeah, but then, you have to encourage the individual. What is your gift? What is it you bring to the craft that's going to be of value? For me, I've known for years, I've circled it in the book of Galatians where it lists all the gifts of the Spirit. I circled the word teacher, highlighted it, wrote up beside it, my calling. And giving a Masonic education and teaching Masonic education, that's been my what's next. And that's what keeps me going.
That's a really good way to put it. And what's next is kind of again, this kind of delves really nicely into what I wrote. It's more than a game, right? What's next is the ultimate question that, so I in my work, what I focused on was this idea of gamification and the extent to which gamification is applying the tools used to create engaging systems, particularly games. Video games is what most people think of. Applying those principles in other aspects of life, whether it be Freemasonry or otherwise, right? And the what's next is one of those questions that comes up a lot in gamification, right? How do you keep somebody playing a video game over and over again? What comes next, right? You finish the first chapter of the game. What's the next one? What's the next one? Same thing with Freemasonry. And it's very easy to have a what's next up through the Worshipful Master's chair, usually, right? You apply what's next, initiation, what's next, fellowcraft, what's next, Master Mason, what's next, Steward. You can go through those chairs. Then you're an IPM, which can have its own kind of cachet. And then what's next? Right. And it's called the over justification problem, right? But there's this idea of if you just keep adding what next to the thing, some next goal at a certain point doesn't mean anything, right? It becomes just a thing you collect. There has to actually be a purpose and a reason behind the next chapter to keep them coming out. For Dante, what was next famously was paradise. He makes it through purgatory. This is where we have to leave our friend Virgil, or I guess our friend Virgil leaves us.
Yeah.
I think, again, obviously Inferno gets the most love and the most attention of the Divine Comedy. I think Purgatory is often overlooked, but I think that Paradise is fairly well known. It gets a fair bit of love. Within Paradise and Virgil, Dante's Ascent, what are some of the lessons from that work that you feel apply to Freemasonry?
Oh, well, for me, and what I tried to bring out in taking the individual through paradise or through heaven was the employing of Kabbalah. This is where I kind of first really tried to dive into the 10 sephiroths that compose the tree of life. And looking at those properties, and there's kind of spiritual meetings, and then looking at the different planets he had to go through, and then going back to those 7 ancient planets again. Um, I began to put together these kind of moral teachings uh, that are kind of hidden in Paradiso, that Masonry actually can bring them out and make them very clear. Um, and when you read that third part of the book, it really takes you on this kind of in-depth dive into, I guess, what you could call moral philosophies, these moral principles that really bring you in closer to the divine. And that's why, and here's where I really went on this kind of transcendental journey of mixing the Jewish Kabbalah with the Beatitudes of Jesus from the Gospel of Matthew and the Buddhist Noble Eightfold Pathway. So the third part is really just transcendental understanding of the nature of the great architect and the light that he can put inside of us, and that we can find in him, that lead us to be the best possible Mason and man we can be.
And when you were, as we talked about earlier, right, as you were developing these ideas, you were speaking with your Masonic brethren about them. I'm curious, especially as you got to those later books, or the latter book, Paradise. What was some of the feedback you were getting from your Masonic brethren, and especially this idea of connecting it to some of these more esoteric, more spiritual ideas, Kabbalah, Buddhism, right? What was the responses to that? Because I do find within Freemasonry, there can sometimes be a divide between those who find a more, because Freemasonry is not a religion, nor should it be considered as such, but there definitely can be those who find more spiritual fulfillment within it versus those who find it more for fraternal purposes, some, for family connection, whatever it might be. I'm curious, what was the response like when you started to find these connections between Freemasonry and the Kabbalah, between Buddhism? What was the response like from your brethren?
I got a lot of positive response. As I mentioned in the book, I give this wonderful thank you to Curtis Baines and his wife, Allison. Curtis is Jewish. And when I was showing him these parallels I was drawing between Kabbalah, the Beatitudes, Buddhism, he was thrilled. Even though I was taking this Jewish symbolism that's really prominent to him, very important to their mystical side, he had no offense or took no exception at all to me drawing these other parallels with it. He was actually very encouraging. Now I have come across Masons who have said Masonry is strictly Christian, and no, it's not. Not ever will be, nor should it ever be. And so I think some of them, they kind of shied away from wanting to talk to me about it, and that's their choice to make. But there have been a overwhelming amount of brothers who heard what I'm doing, saw what I was writing, and they're like, "Hey, we really like this. It's a little deep for us, but we like what you're doing." So yeah, I got some really good feedback on it.
I mean, go in deep waters. That's how you learn how to swim, right? Metaphorically speaking, not
Yep.
literally. No one listen to that and sue me for being an idiot. Metaphorically, though, the way to learn to swim is find yourself some deep waters and jump in. You'll figure it out.
Yeah, and curious enough, in Paradiso, right in one of their early cantos, either one or two, Dante says that he's traveling out on this vast ocean in his little bark, and that only follow him if you're willing to get lost. Um, a bark is a three-mast sailing ship, so it's not a little ship at all. But in the vast ocean of truth and discovery of transcendental truth, it's a tiny little speck on a big body of water. So he actually warns the reader before you continue on this journey, you best make sure it's somewhere you want to sail
And so, I would encourage everybody, and I'm going to leave the link in the description to check out and order Masonic Commedia. Like I was saying, if you're a Mason, order 2 copies, one for yourself and also one for the building. You can leave it on a bookshelf for other brothers to check out. Or, just if you can only afford one, that's fine. Get one, read it yourself, and then maybe donate it to the building. Because we need fully stocked shelves within our lodges and our buildings. I do want to move on quickly and mention again Arcana Veritas Awards.
to.
Now, to be selected as a finalist for this award, you need to submit your work. So I'm just curious, what made you decide to submit Masonic Commedia to the Arcana Veritas Awards? Did you submit it? Did somebody else submit it on your behalf? Or where did you get the idea to submit this work?
It was this last early summer on the South Carolina Grand Lodge Facebook page. Right Worshipful Brother Dr. Robert Elsner put up a post and said, "Hey, there's this Arcana Veritas Distinction Award in Scotland, and some of you Masonic scholar Arthur types should submit some of your work for consideration." I'm like, I've never heard of this thing. So, hey, what the hell? Let's just see what happens. And, when I was writing this book, I kept telling my wife, I said, there's something special about this book. I don't know what it is, but there's something about it. One day is going to change my life. And it's a couple years later, um, I'm finding out because I submitted the book, um, went through it, found out, hey, I got to send a copy to them. So I got it to them and told Right Worshipful Elsner, I said, hey, I took your advice. I submitted my book and we'll see what happens. I don't know, October 2nd, I get an email from uh, the Arcana Veritas judging committee said, hey, congratulations, you've been elevated to a finalist. And I go, oh my God, I don't have a passport. I've never been out of the country in my life. So that started a mad scramble, trying to get ready, but I got everything done.
That is awesome, and you got your passport and you're all set.
Mm-hmm.
And how well, I mean, I guess there's probably a couple bits of excitement there for you. Then I was going to ask, how excited are you to be a finalist for these awards? But then, as you mentioned, first time out of the country. So just how excited are you, let's say, for 2 weeks from now?
A week. I'm flying out in a week from today.
So then how excited, me too, actually. Maybe we'll meet each other in Heathrow. Who knows? How excited are you for everything? The trip, the award ceremony, the whole shebang. How excited are you?
Oh, I cannot keep my mind on on my job half the day. Uh, I work for a company called Western Branch Diesel. I'm a specialist for Volvo Penta marine applications and industrial applications. And if I'm not looking up somebody's parts, I'm looking on Google Maps, like what's around my hotel, where am I going to eat, when am I going to go visit. Um, and I keep yelling at my coworkers, going, "Is it Scotch 30 yet?" you know, because I love Scotch. I have 14-year-old single malt Scotch that is just divine. I'm curious to see what it's like over there. I am beyond stoked for this trip.
I am as well. I've been lucky enough that I've been able to travel a fair bit. I've been lucky and blessed to be able to do that. I also, however, my family is, well, my dad is from England. He's from Northern England, so just south of Scotland. And he met in the 70s. He met a Canadian girl, and the rest is history. So
Yeah.
British mothers, don't let your sons meet Canadian girls, because they move to Canada and you never see them again.
Yeah.
Give warning to all the British mothers out there who have sons. But so my dad's family is still over there, and I don't get to see them, very often at all. So I'm looking forward to the trip. Not only to, obviously, the awards ceremony is going to be great, but before that, to get to hang out with my family, see them once again. That'll be really nice. My grandfather, my dad's side, he passed away before I was born, but he was the master of Halt Whistle Lodge, and I got his jewel, actually. And I hope to visit Halt Whistle Lodge while I'm there, which again is just south of the Scottish border. So it's going to be really, really fun, and I can't wait as well. And maybe we will run into each other. I'm arriving. Actually, technically, I arrive the morning of the 24th. I leave the 23rd, but it's a red eye, so I get in the morning of the 24th, and then I'm going to be checking out. Going to try to stop by Freemasons Hall if I can, and then catch a bus up to Newcastle, and then Scotland. So
Yeah.
I can't. I'm very excited as well. It's going to be a lot of fun. Do you have any specific, like, outside of, I'm assuming, trying Scotch, because doesn't Scotch come from Scotland? Isn't that where it originated from? I could be mistaken. I don't drink, so.
I tend to think so. I know there are different blend. Sometimes they're blended, and then there's some that are just single malts. The one thing I know for sure is when I go to a tavern or restaurant or somewhere and order a glass of scotch, I will not be asking for any ice. That is just absolutely the worst insult you can do. and even now, I've never drank my scotch with ice in it. Just room temperature in the glass it goes.
So
So,
then, aside from trying some Scotch without ice in
mm,
Scotland, are you going to be checking out Freemasons Hall? Like, do you have any other plans for while you're there? I know you said you're checking Google Maps to see what's around your hotel. So I know you mentioned you're going to a banquet while you're there as well. I can't remember,
yeah.
but yeah,
Um,
any plans specifically other than Scotch, no ice?
I'm thinking about scheduling a tour of um, the Grand Lodge building on Tuesday. I can do that. Um, there are a couple places there I really want to see. One is the Writers Museum that was established in 1616. So it's a very old building. Just want to go there and see it. Of course, Wednesday will be there for the award ceremony, and I'm also signed on to do a book signing afterwards. Thursday, I have my letter of recognition that my Grand Lodge sent to the Grand Lodge of Scotland, so I can attend their installation of Grand Lodge officers on Thursday. And then that evening is their Festival of Saint Andrew. It's a 4 hour event. They're going to have dinner, pipes, dancing. It's going to be sounds like it's going to be quite the show to see. So I'm looking to spending those 2 days with a lot of brothers from Scotland.
Are you going to be spending any time in? Oh yeah, you said on Tuesday do a tour of the Grand
Mhm.
Lodge. So yeah, I think, like I said, it's going to be a blast. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person. Also, I'm looking forward to meeting all of the finalists. I don't know if they all will be able to make it, but
Yeah.
whichever finalists are there, like I said, I think, and I talked again to Roland Prince about this. Um, Without a doubt, within Freemasonry, there is a great deal of space, or I think space that's available for research and for study, and for whether it be studying the metaphorical aspects of the craft, the esoteric aspects of the craft, the history of the craft, right? And I think anything that can be done to promote those things, is incredibly valuable, and to promote the work of brethren. such as yourself, for taking the time to produce this, right? And hopefully, brethren check it out and it helps them expand in their Masonic journey, right? We're called upon to make a daily advancement, at least an emulation ritual. I think you guys are as well, if I recall correctly. Right, called upon to make a daily advancement in Masonic knowledge. That doesn't just mean necessarily memorizing important dates of Freemasonry, though that stuff matters. That doesn't necessarily mean exclusively learning your ritual, though that matters. That could also mean reviewing, Masonic Commedia, reviewing other works in a similar fashion, learning more about the symbolism of Freemasonry and how it can be applied to some of the greatest works of all time, which I would argue the Divine Comedy is one of. So I guess what I'm trying to say by all that is thank you for taking the time to write this. Thank you for submitting it to Arcana Veritas. And thank you for your work in promoting the esoteric and the metaphorical side of Freemasonry and the symbolism therein. I think is very valuable.
Yeah, it's been a great pleasure to do it. And the one thing I have a very simple mantra for life, and that's be successful and not famous. And the difference between the two is if you're trying to be famous, you're just there for yourself. It's self-serving, and whatever you try to do to be famous, when you die, it goes with you. Successful people, they inspire others, and that's what I'm out to do, and that's what I'm trying to do. When I give an education, what matters to me is when a brother comes and says, "Hey, I appreciate that. I got something out of it." If just one brother says that, it's been a success, because now I've inspired and motivated that individual. So it's been quite the honor to do this.
How many books will you be bringing with you, or are the books already there? Like, were they shipped over? But how many books will you have to sign? Because I know you said you're doing a book signing afterwards.
Mm.
Also, might you be bringing any other swag from South Carolina? I don't know, pins, coins, things like that. What type of stuff's going to be in that suitcase of yours?
Well, the only thing I'm bringing over with me are the lapel pins for our Grand Master, who sadly passed away in August, just 3 months after being installed, and pins of our Deputy Grand Master. I've got 20 pairs of each. The books, I actually created a UK Amazon account, so I'm going to order them in country. I'll be paying in pounds. I have 20 copies being sent to the Grand Lodge of Scotland, and I've already coordinated with them to hold on to them until I get there. I want to order them probably tomorrow, and they'll be there by Friday.
Awesome. All right. Well, yeah. So 1 week we're both leaving, and then a week and a half is the award ceremony. I can't wait to meet you in person. Thank you again for all of your work. And I don't drink myself, but maybe if we get the time, you can have your scotch with no ice. I'll have a ginger beer, which is my favorite United Kingdom drink. It's a wonderful soft drink they have over there, and we'll have a cheers together. Thank you again for everything.
Yeah, you're very welcome, and I will certainly share in a ginger beer because I've never heard of such a thing, and I'm willing to find out what it is.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. I suspect there's also alcoholic versions of it. At least I think I've heard of them, but the one I'm thinking of, it's a soft drink. It's like a Coke or Pepsi or whatever it is. But the first time I ever tried it was in the United Kingdom, and I think it's native to there or originated there. But on a really hot day, there's nothing better than an ice cold ginger beer. So I'll tell you what, you can have a scotch with no ice and a ginger beer, and I'll just have the ginger beer.
That sounds like a plan to me. And I'm being encouraged. I better not leave Scotland without having tried haggis.
Haggis is great. Haggis is great. It tastes. I mean, I've been told I've never actually had haggis. I've had what I was told was the Canadian or the like North American version of haggis. But
Mm-hmm.
the type that when I've had what was called haggis, it tasted great. I don't know how much like what the difference is, but I'm going to try it with you. So it sounds like we're going to have a great meal together. That's for sure.
There is a place over by some big rail station area. It's called the Tempting Tatty, and they do these massive baked potatoes that are topped with everything. Well, there is one where It is topped with haggis.
I mean, a name like that, it's got to be Scottish. It's got to be good.
Oh yeah, you know it's going to be. And it's right next door to a place called Chocolatarium. And I am a
Oh,
chocoholic, and I am not trying to get help for it.
I mean,
I
I'm
love
worried about how much
chocolate.
stuff I'm going to be bringing back home with me now. I think, it's going to be, thank heavens, I don't think we have any of the duty and tariff issues between Canada and Scotland that the States has with us in Canada.
Yeah,
So maybe it'll be my chance to bring back a poop ton of chocolate and a poop ton of, because I'm going to try to load up on souvenirs while I'm there. Certainly, I'm going to see if I can, be grabbing as many different pins and coins and Masonic memorabilia as I
yeah.
can for myself and my brethren. And I'll be bringing my own stuff as well. But yeah, now I've got to have a bunch of chocolate to bring back as well. I probably shouldn't be trying to bring back haggis. I feel like it might smell up the plane a little
No,
bit. So
no.
maybe, but chocolate and pins and coins, I suspect my bag will be overladen with those things, but it'll be worth it. It'll be a lot of fun. So
Yep,
maybe even a bottle of scotch for the brethren. They can enjoy it.
yep. I've already got my eye on what I want to get.
What is it?
It's called Royal, and I can't even pronounce the last name. A lady sent me the picture of the bottle. She had it while she was over there just last summer. She says, if you like scotch, this is the one you got to try. Um,
There you go.
I will
Alrighty.
take it.
All right. I'll talk to you later, brother. Thank you again.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I enjoyed this. It was a pleasure to talk with you.